Order. And sorry about Tuesday. I had to go to the doctor again. Got to go again next Thursday, so there won't be a meeting next Thursday. I can't imagine why I am so popular with them. Um,
Other than cash flow?
yeah, maybe. The key question is you want to ask them what would you be doing if you were independently wealthy? And if they say anything other than this, you probably should leave. Um, I just posted a link to a YouTube channel that I've been watching for the past couple of weeks called AI Revolution, which is pretty good at keeping up with evolving things. Of course, some of the evolving things are way over my head, so I sort of pick up on parts of it, and parts of it I don't. But it's better than nothing, I guess.
Yeah.
So, anything you'd like to talk about today, Thor?
No, I'm trying to learn more about the relationships of the question that you posted, and especially the social engineering part, which, as you know, has some bearing on the communication of governance across borders for problems of global nature and how systems thinking and systems engineering uh, can contribute to better solutions for that one. I don't know if I explained that well enough.
I think it made sense.
So just go ahead with your program and I see if I have anything to ask about it as we go along. You said if you have time, you go to social engineering implications.
Well, the attendees are the program because I don't have an agenda. Um,
I see.
John,
Okay.
move your camera up so we can see your. That's better, so we can see your smiley face. Thank you. So we can talk about one of the topics of systems engineering and systems thinking and the relationship or the not relationship. And the other one, as Thor mentioned, was social engineering. So we can talk about either one of them, whatever you would, or we could talk about the two of them together. I don't care.
That actually sounds
Everything is confusing. Hi, Avi.
Hi, how are you guys?
Pretty
Hi,
good.
Gene.
so. Does the word social engineering actually make sense based on the definition of
Uh,
engineering?
it could. What
So
is what?
isn't that
Well,
isn't that technically biomedical engineering?
well, we can fight about labels a lot. I don't just, you know, one is a subset of the other, maybe, or
Well, I guess
um.
it may be labeling, or it may be sort of yeah, I don't know. I find that if without a solid definition for things, it's very hard to talk on the same planes.
Don't mind my interruption, but what is the problem we're trying to solve?
We're going to discuss, we're potentially discussing systems engineering and social engineering.
Uh, with the
But
view that is a pathway towards an end, right? What is the end
well,
that we are looking at?
I don't think there's a problem we're trying to solve, Avi. It's a group for better understanding, maybe.
I think there's a problem.
Oh, there's a problem. Okay.
Now, again, I think that so. You'd asked me to put something together for this, and let me do a lead in to my thinking. And I think the question about social engineering and how social interventions impact what's going on in systems engineering, which is sort of why I'm asking the question. So my background is computer engineering, which was back when they were giving those degrees. It was digital engineering and software, and I quickly transitioned into software. And about 11 years after that, I got picked as the systems engineer guy because we didn't have any, and I obviously wasn't one, but they didn't have any anyway, and they threw me into the corporate pool for systems engineering. Corporation I was working for had both mil-aero and commercial parts to it. I was on the commercial side, so I've sort of seen that breadth of what systems engineering was trying to do, and we had to modify the DoD mil-aero systems engineering to work in the commercial environment. There's some reasons for that, which I can go into, but more importantly is I've seen both sides of that. About, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago, I realized that the rest of the systems disciplines existed in a formal sense because I'd never seen any of that through the training I had in systems engineering. So that's a bit of the timeline. And since then, I've been working on why didn't I see any of that in systems engineering? And why is the professional organization for systems engineering trying to recreate the things that systems thinking and system dynamics and general systems theory already seem to have both some theory for and some tools for? So that's a little background for me to see where I'm coming from with thinking there's a problem and trying to make some headway against that. And one of those pieces turns out to be, you know, the systems professional perspective of trying to say that everything is a system and they need to be everywhere, anything that might have a system associated with it, doing everything about it. So that's my problem, because I think that there's a well-defined definition of what engineering does, what kinds of outputs it has, and the scope at which it works. And it's slightly different than working at the level of social intervention. So I see a hierarchy of system disciplines, basically starting with the science, having a number of applied sciences, and systems engineering may be one of those applied sciences. I'm open to that discussion, that it's not actually a step beyond the other applied sciences. But it has built into its word, its name, is the fact that it applies technology to solve problems. That's sort of the definition of engineering, which is why I question whether the word social engineering is really a correct term. Not that there's not intervention possible, not that there's logic necessary, but those things are necessary everywhere and shouldn't be applied to the word engineering.
So if you take the kinds of things that systems engineers do, and they attempt to do it with a community, what do you call it? The same thing?
Well, me or they?
No, I'm interested in your perspective.
Yeah, my perspective is that to begin with, systems engineering is an element of business processes to begin with, and is not in a lot of the rooms where a lot of the decisions are made. So its thrust to try to build its way back up into the hierarchy of business decisions is inappropriate. It doesn't typically have the scope of view for the goals of the business. It has the scope of view of the goals for the product. So,
if you don't mind about system math engineering, do you mind, Gene, if I share my screen with you for a minute?
Okay.
Thank you. So this is one of my tools, which is called ideagens.com. And this is what I call a system map, right? Any program has three components: input, processes, and output.
Hey, that sounds like a function.
Yeah, right. So basically, this is the kind of input we are looking at government schools in India, for example. And then we go and look at what are the inputs coming in. Then we have a whole set of processes, the teaching processes that go in, and we have a list of these 17 processes which are part of that. And I can show you details how I've done it. And then the student graduates. Now, when the student graduates with the lesser numbers, then we go on the bottom right and go back. What was the process output gap? And then we again go back to input process gap, right? Was the process is wrong and input correct? And then we finally look at the input. If the quality of the teachers coming as the input is poor, the output is going to be bad, right? So this is the kind of way I look at it. I'm sure you people look at it very differently, right? This is just my 2 cents intervention. Thank you. Go ahead.
That's quite in line with the way I think of solving those kinds of problems. It's also similar to the way one would go about, well, I don't know about solving those problems, but that's evaluating those problems. Because you haven't actually come up with the implementation mechanisms for that. And I would say that once the problem has been defined and there's a solution that is being proposed, it's the time for engineering to get involved to find out if the mechanisms are in place to do or are available to do that, or feasible to do that is often the term that gets used in systems engineering. Is a solution feasible?
So engineering isn't involved in figuring out what the solution is, just figuring out if it's feasible after somebody else figures out what the solution
is? There's no reason that smart people from anywhere can't be working on the problem.
Okay.
But they're not doing engineering. They're doing problem solving and may well be applying systems approaches, but they're not doing engineering. Right? The fact that you calculate a tip when you go to the restaurant doesn't make you a mathematician. So that's the way I'm thinking about things, and thinking that there are problem solving everywhere throughout whatever gets done, but the intent and the goal of the products that you're generating have more implication about what it is you're doing in that problem solving than your stated role within an organization. So I've been in the process of trying to make that point in various places, and trying to get some grounding on what the outputs of the activities are, and talking about it from a functional perspective rather than a role perspective. And I'd be happy for any input I get from other people who are using systems techniques in their area of problem solving.
Sure. On that thing about being a mathematician at the restaurant, the trend seems to be where the restaurant and the wait staff is not going to count on the general public being a mathematician at all, because my receipt is coming to me saying, and here's the guideline for tipping. 15% would be these dollars and cents, 20% would be that, and 22% would be the other. You know, pick one and write it down, and we'll go from there.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
that's just technology moving on, right?
Yes, and the wait staff is glad, and yeah. Okay, 40 years in IT. and a recent medical patient. So the hospital called me, said, show up on Monday morning, and we're going to do a blood draw for your heart catheterization on Wednesday. So, yes, I show up on Monday morning to the right place at the right time, and they say, Browning. How do you spell that? Browning. Oh, you're not on the list, sir.
Not like Ferris Bueller.
Yeah, well, this isn't my day off, and Wednesday's not going to be my day off either. So I walked down the hall to the cardiologist's office and I said, hey, they don't have an order. They looked at me kind of, I don't know, defensive or stunned or whatever. And I said, they said, well, here's an order. You could take it over to LabCorp outside of the hospital. I said, I want to have some confidence in the hospital. So I walked back to the lab and they somehow magically generated an order. And I got they know that my blood was going to coagulate. I thought, this hospital doesn't have a great reputation. What's the problem with the system? The costs are out of control. So it seems to me it would be fairly simple, right? You sit there in the doctor's office talking on the phone to someone in the lab and you generate a legitimate order. Hey, lab, did you get the order? No. Why not? And you start tracing it down. Customer satisfaction goes up, employee frustration goes down, hospital reputation goes up, costs stabilize, just because we sent the information where it was supposed to go. And this is not rocket science to do.
John, it's just a job.
So, but it's
Your
an
health isn't relevant.
Well, if I needed a job, I'd go to that hospital and I'd walk into the CEO's office and I'd say, what the heck? You know, I'm a citizen, I'm a tax-paying citizen and a patient. Well, anyway, all that's just lead into what I have today. So, you know, this 40-year IT thing, and I finally switched out of that to say, you know what? I'm a teacher. I was tutoring math, and then this past year I tutored robotics in one school, in a homeschool enrichment thing, and mentoring, and in a public middle school, something called AVID, which is learning how to learn, systematic, which it's a good thing it's in there, because in a public school, there's not a lot that's systematic for learning how to learn. Shouldn't be a surprise, right? Well, at this same time, I'm looking at this systems thinking, Kumu, intelligent design. And in the past couple of weeks, I find something where a lady in Seattle with a PhD in biophysics and bioengineering has been applying engineering principles to the study of biology. And it makes a closed communication loop. So what we've developed over time for how to do engineering works real well at summarizing how to fill in the knowledge gaps in biology. Now, as far as computer systems go, yeah, we can do biology and study the flagellar motor and the mitochondria and all of that. They work fairly predictably. Human computer systems, the problem is the user can be pretty perverse some of the time, as you know. So the problem with a lot of systems is that the person out there at the object of study out there at the end of the system is pretty fuzzy compared to other systems where they're fairly precise.
And they're working on replacing those people. So there's hope for the future because they're all going to be out of work.
Really? That'll teach them.
So that generates
but in terms of what you said about using engineering to fill in the gaps in biology, that's probably true for a whole range of disciplines, okay?
Yes.
Because it's very abnormal for systems engineers and biologists to talk to each other, I think, okay? I mean, they all have their own silos that they live in, okay?
And that's one of the things these guys talk about, is that they need to be cross-trained so they can talk to each other.
Why do we need to define the words they use? We should just understand what's going on, right, Gene? Isn't that the point you were making earlier?
That there are no new problems?
But I would say that biomedical engineers are already doing that. They're cross-trained, so those exist. Are they systems engineers? Do they have to be systems engineers? I don't know. It depends on what you expect a systems engineer to do and what their output's going to be.
Well, we have
systems thinking. Yes, they need to apply systems thinking. I'll give you that one easy.
Can we have systems thinking engineers?
Absolutely. Again,
okay.
It's not it's not who can do it. It's the fact that they don't own it. Right? They weren't the originators of it. They don't own it.
Who doesn't know? I think you lost
any specific group, right? I mean, I would say that systems thinking somehow was developed as an offshoot of general systems theory, not from some path out of systems engineering. Right? So that's the way I'm picturing it. Maybe it could be wrong. I'm not seeing any signs of being wrong in the research I'm doing.
Well, of course, you're looking at only papers that agree with you.
No, I'm looking at the history of general systems theory happening, and the time frames that things were happening in, and the time frame that people were talking about doing engineering and what they were doing. I mean, that's I would agree that if I was talking, specifically looking at the results of people, picking a book or something, that's probably what I would get.
So how do you define Bruce? How do you define engineering?
Let me see if strangely enough, I've got papers of definitions of those things.
Oh no! If you have to look it up, it's not good.
Well, no, I can answer it, but I can tell. I mean, if you take a look at sort of the Britannica answer.
No, I'm looking for Bruce's definition. What is engineering?
My definition of engineering is the application of mechanisms and technology to solve human problems.
Doesn't have to be a human problem.
It has to be. It almost by definition has to be a problem defined by a human.
Okay.
Because humans that have problems, not anybody else.
Okay. So what kind of things don't fall into that category?
Things that processes. If you're solving a problem with a process, it's not a mechanism per se.
But you probably engineered the process, right?
No, you can't engineer a process because a process doesn't have a physical element. There may be physical elements in the process that can be engineered, but the process definition itself is not engineered. It's intervened. I don't have a great word for what that other thing is, but there needs
Well,
I think there needs to be a separation so that other people can do it.
okay,
You
so
solve
so
problems
the
like all the time. Would you consider yourself to be an engineer?
no.
So then how can you do it?
Well,
You're doing this the same thing you're suggesting that an engineer would be doing. Why aren't you an engineer?
because I haven't labeled myself that way. Now, in terms of the process, though, somebody figures out that this process you have to do A and feed B and feed C and feed D, and that's the process.
Mm-hmm.
And I would think that the person who figures that all out is actually engineering the process.
They're defining the process. They may be modifying the process, but again, what's your definition of engineering? You
Well,
modified engineered it.
I just tried to give it to you, but you don't like it. Okay.
Okay, right. And if that example was your definition, then I don't think engineering applies to it. I think that
Okay.
engineering specifically applies to mechanisms and technology.
So
Not that there's not a thing there, and a thing that needs a word.
there's not a thing.
The mental activity of evaluating a set of functions and their sequencing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We can come up with a more formal definition of what you just described. And then if you want to talk about the inputs and the outputs associated with A, B, and C, we can determine whether some of those things, the functions associated with some of those things are going to be modifying physical resources between their inputs and their outputs. And that would be a time to get an engineering. It may or may not be a systems engineer, but that's definitely a time to get an engineering.
Okay, so the process that I just described solves the problem, but the engineer figured out that process was the answer?
No, the engineer figures out how to implement it if there is a technology and mechanism required.
So who, in fact, decides or figures out that, all right, who figured out how to turn potatoes into potato chips?
I would say an applied scientist of some sort.
Applied scientist, but not an engineer.
Not an engineer, no. An engineer would figure out how to ramp it up so you could have McDonald's.
So you could what?
So you could have McDonald's.
Oh,
French
shoot
fries.
that person. Shoot.
But the process of potatoes is different than figuring out how to do a potato. That's an engineering and an industrial engineering activity.
Interesting. I have to ponder that.
Chefs and cooks might be involved in the original design of what's on the packaged goods shelves at the grocery store, but mechanical engineers are involved in a process that takes the potato and slices it and fries it and packages it, and I'll go so far as to say puts it on the truck.
Right.
So you're saying that's a mechanical engineer, but not a systems engineer?
Well, I hope he's studied some systems engineering concepts. Yeah, so that it's a profitable process.
So I can add some thinking to that, strangely enough, since this is sort of the problem that I'm working on, is that I think that if you take a look at the systems engineering definitions, there is something that they call the V model, which, depending on whether you're using A or B style systems engineering, either starts with an analysis of the problem or starts with the requirements associated with the problem. and then essentially works its way through alternatives to the point where they can actually implement something. And then systems engineering. So, and then at the bottom of the V, there's the actual make it production. And coming back up the right-hand side is verification and validation activities, integration, verification, and validation activities. So that's
Quality control.
That's a V model. So if systems engineers actually believed in that V model, they would not be trying to claim that they do all this other systems stuff. And that would be very valid. And there are good definitions of what the deliverables are outside of that V. So on the incoming side, there's been some systems analysis done that describes the problem domain in detail and the desired solution domain. Now, I agree that systems engineers at the beginning of that process should evaluate whether it makes sense and it's feasible to go from the problem domain to the solution domain. But the majority of their activity is not just figuring out what the problem domain is. And then their activities break things down architecturally to the components of the solution. And they're not responsible for implementing those things. Those are engineering disciplines.
Yeah, Bruce, I just went to Gemini and asked it about the difference between a mechanical engineer and a systems engineer. It said mechanical engineer focuses on the nitty-gritty of the physical behaviors, and a systems engineer is a big picture person. Systems engineers are concerned with the overall design, integration, management, and optimization of complex systems over their entire life cycle.
I would not disagree with that.
Right? So I just posted the link to it. The link will be valid for a couple of days.
Okay. Yeah. Again, I have bunches of those kinds of things. I spent the last week or so, starting to use Gemini instead of some of the other things I've been using, like electronically searching through the encyclopedias, but it comes up with about the same answer. But again, when you talk about a big picture person there, you're talking about somebody that's developing an architecture, which is a set of components that are going to technically solve that problem. And the problem that's been handed to them, based on the fact that they're engineers, I would suggest are typically mechanisms and technology solutions, or maybe solved with technologies and methods. And whoever has passed them the information is in general going to be evaluating the socio-technical environment that those technical solutions have to live in.
Systems thinking.
Yep, go ahead.
Systems thinking is a mindset and a philosophy. Systems engineering is a discipline and a practice.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Right. Which is not the way I thought about it before, but it does make sense.
Mm-hmm. So that's one of the other questions I have from from the people who might be here. I'm not exactly sure what everybody's background is, but from the perspective that I've seen and starting to get more involved in the other system discipline activities in groups, is that the people doing system dynamics and generalized systems thinking and applying the systems approach tend to ignore engineering because that drops off the bottom of what they're doing. And I wonder if that observation seems unreasonable to people who are not doing the engineering but still doing systems thinking.
You wanted to get in here, Thor?
Well, I'm running through my experience with this. Look, I was studying architecture, and I got a diploma of engineering in architecture. Then I got into all kinds of other things, So architecture and engineering and so forth are getting more and more useless for the general public who wants to know, I got something that doesn't work here, it keeps dropping rain through the roof, or it keeps flooding my basement, and who do I call? Who are you going to call for this? For that problem, it was important to know how the different disciplines, how different people were called. You call a butcher to get your meat, you call a baker to get your bread. That was useless if you start calling everybody, including the butcher and the baker and the roofer, engineers. Okay, it isn't helpful. But there is a problem. I just ran into an article about a lady who was becoming the chair or the speaker of a parliamentary system. And she was complaining. I won't tell you the country, okay? She was complaining to the chancellor of the country, of the head of the government, that in the parliament, here's the bench for the government, for all the different secretaries, and that it's mostly empty. Well, what was happening? Her concern was, of course, a very old-fashioned one, just like the parliament is getting old-fashioned, okay? The concern is this: we want to make sure that the government is hearing all our concerns, our worried, our issues that we want answers, what we want the government to do. And the only way in the old days was for the government to come into parliament and listen to the people complaining, because the technology wasn't there. All right. So now I at the first incident where I became derailed from architecture, I got into a place that was designing information systems for government. IBIS, issue-based information systems. Okay, that was 50, 60 years ago. In the meantime, I have a lot of respect for the information systems engineers who can do all these wonderful things like the stuff that we're doing now. It's amazing. Why is this lady asking her chancellor to make sure that government people show up in parliament? It's obsolete. It's a ridiculous relic from another time that didn't have telephones, didn't have radio, didn't have TV, didn't have cell phones or any of that. Why isn't that getting through to her, that her reasonable concern that is still valid, make the government understand what we're worried about, cannot be solved by that ancient system? And why is it that all the fancy systems that we have in systems engineering, in information technology, in electrical engineering, and all that, getting through to the people who are making these decisions? She's the chair of the parliament, of the house, and asking these stupid questions. So what is getting lost in the process here, and who are the people to call, and what should we call them? I'm not sure. It's just the names that we need to find better names for the people who do this or that. And the systems thinking promise. I think what's important about it is that getting past the definitions and helping people to get together and figure out, who do we call, what do we have to do, and how to do it, and how in this day and time we can have these fantastic technological engineering solutions not getting through to people who are having the problems. That's my question. I don't know exactly what to do about it.
That's a very, very good question. I actually see that as an understanding, or the need for an understanding of the actual functions that need to be provided to be able to solve those kinds of problems. So you need somebody who can think outside of the existing environment, which is the current parliamentary environment that you're describing this woman being involved in, recognizing that there is some momentum to keeping it going, because that's where somebody's prestige is running or growing or keeping hold of, and might be one of the points that are stopping them from applying the technology. And this sounds like, I'm not sure what the name of the person who executes causal loop analysis is, but one of those people, because that function is determining the interactions of the elements that are associated with meeting that goal. Right? And I'm not sure that you guys have a name for that person. Are those people who do systems dynamics, or people who do whatever, or is that just a tool that anybody uses, and there's no assignment of that function to a particular discipline?
So Bruce, all of those things are good. Though first you have to get them to figure out how to get them to care about the problem.
Well, I think the problem is defined. Thorvin has described the need to have input from the populace to make sure that they're being heard. And
the statistic is 33% of the issues that the public cares most about actually get paid attention to by Congress.
Okay.
The number one item on the issue list for members of Congress is getting reelected. Mm-hmm. Okay? Everything else comes second. Now, there might be a couple of people in there that aren't in that category, but most of them are.
Right. Mm-hmm. I agree.
Okay? So to figure things out, how to go about it, doesn't make much sense until you get someone to care about the problem. Because, if the question of consultants going into organizations and figuring out the answer, and then they write the report and it sits on the shelf because nobody ever reads it, okay? Because they were just covering their ass and they got somebody to come in and look at the situation, and nobody really wanted to change anything anyway.
I might expand the idea that in the U.S. at this point in time, everyone has recognized that there are problems, and they may even agree on what those problems are. The biggest problem we have at the moment is whether or not they agree on the solutions to those problems. Because I don't find myself necessarily at odds with either the Republicans or the Democrats' description of problems. I have substantial differences with their solutions to them.
Yeah, one is about as bad as the other.
And I would agree with that in various cases, although the reason for them being bad, having bad solutions are different,
Mhm.
right? Uh, so yeah, I agree, Gene. To actually solve this problem, which I'm not sure I can do, uh, you would surely have to find a leverage point
Mhm.
that would help make this visible.
And I'll
And
say a few seconds, I think it's really important. We can hear everybody talk for a long time, and it keeps going on and on. We're very honest about the fact. I think we need to come with a problem that we want to solve. Don't come with say I'm a system engineering guy, I'm a system dynamic guy, I'm this guy. There are plenty of tools around. I think the important thing is to at least understand the problem, because I think we are jumping the gun because hey, I'm a system engineering guy, so I'm going to take my binoculars on this problem and solve it that way, right? The point is that like you all heard about it, if the only tool in your toolbox is a hammer, then everything is a nail, right? So what I feel slightly frustrated on this ongoing debate going on and on about the fact, and I did start earlier, that what problem trying to solve. I was told, no, we're not trying to solve any problem. But then what I hear now, that people are talking about problems, right? So from my perspective, it does not really add value. Let's look a particular problem. I talked last time about the book Abundance. I can share that book with you. I can share a mind map of that book. So at least educate ourselves, because otherwise we're just throwing what we think every day. Nothing new comes out of this discussion, in my opinion. And I'm sorry if I sound frustrated, because I feel frustrated with this ongoing conversation.
What excited me very much, this revelation into systems engineering looping back to biology, is, oh, here's a way I can teach these kids that there are mental models out there. You can reach back into what you implicitly understand and find a mental model and apply it and simplify things. Okay. Uh, you want the kid to be able to write a story. You want him to be able to read a story. Okay. Um, a business plan is a special kind of story. An engineering log is a special kind of story. A scientific hypothesis is a special kind of story. A historical novel. Wow. Hey kids, could we look at history through the lens of one of the 7 basic plots? And then one of the kids gave me the answer I was looking for. Because, Mr. Browning, you mean because large groups of people in some country at some point in time were playing the role of victim? I said, that's exactly what I want you to see. And then somebody came along and said, well, okay, I'll step up and be the villain. And history's gone back and forth like that. Okay, kids, now when you understand how you can look at history and your current environment in terms of story, you should be able to write your own story. You can analyze the data, analyze the circumstance, and write your own story. And towards the end of this last semester, I was starting to get, okay, makes sense. I guess I will. And that's very hopeful to me.
it would be more hopeful if some of that was actually happening in schools to begin with, but yes.
Well, yeah.
But yeah, yeah, there's so many things going on with that at the moment that I can't even make a reasonable comment about it, because we're going backwards in trying to educate people, because educated people aren't good for some of the current environments. So yeah, Avi, I think that's interesting. I understand your frustration, but there's also a need to have a theoretical basis to be able to figure out how to move some of these ideas forward. So that's what
Yeah,
I'm doing for
that the
myself at the
point is
moment.
at this age in our life, we should have sufficient theoretical understanding about problems, right? We are not in grade, we are not studying high school or grade school, right? What I find frustrating that the level of discussion, we should have some framework to talk about. We should talk about hundreds of things that I think I can talk about to be with all humility. But what I find that we just scratching the surface all over again. But we are not making any. Are we at the end of this conversation, 1 hour? Are we smarter? Did we learn anything new?
I will have. I've gotten
Me
some
too.
input from people
Yes, definitely.
who work in some areas that are different than mine, and some who work in the same areas as mine and have visibility into their environments that I don't have. So that definitely is helpful for me to understand the problem that I am trying to solve.
Bruce,
Again,
when you have a framework,
apologies if that's
take a
being sort of
second.
self-centered.
When you have a framework, it does not that the problem area does not matter because you at least understand the framework, right? What I'm trying to say that you have to have certain, you have to have frameworks in mind that you have worked upon, that you understand, so that you can apply to a situation and see whether they fit or not. One can't just blindly walk into a problem area and say, how do we look at it? Because we are working now without a framework, right? So I can go and with all humility talk about it because, but that's what I think is missing in the conversation is those background and that deeper understanding so that one can have a more elevated discussion and look at some practical problems that are there all over around us, right? Because we need to step out of our comfort zone, our rooms, or whatever it is, and look at what's the real is happening in the real world. But if we are looking at semantics or still trying to figure out the definitions of the basic thing, I think we are missing out in that. I'm sorry.
Okay, let me.
Interesting. I'm not sure. Let me just pass on. I'm not sure I disagree with that, but I feel I have a framework that I'm trying to validate with these discussions, and I'm looking for ways of making the points to enough people that we start to hit on some of the points that others here were making about having I'm going to use the word leverage points to be able to have some impact. So and that's where I am. Again, depending on the problem you think you're solving, I don't expect that we're all coming at that from the same perspective. So I appreciate the time you guys are spending with me and trying to help me understand a little bit more about what I'm doing. And hopefully I'm giving you an opportunity to think about it a little bit differently also. I may be wrong, and you may write that off, but it'll be one more thing that you thought about that you have made an assessment of also. I'll try not to do this again since I'm taking a lot of this time.
Well, that's okay, Bruce. So I had a consulting engagement or insulting engagement, depending on how you want to look at it, with this very large organization who was not producing the results that they wanted to produce. So we mapped out all of their activities, and when we got it all modeled, they loved it. And then they wanted us to turn it into a simulation model, and we did. And we spent well over $1 million doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And I woke up one morning and I said, shit, it's a shifting the burden problem. They're spending all their time focusing on the symptoms rather than solving the underlying problem. And if I'd have realized that on day one, I could have saved them $1 million, and they would have fired me on that day. Okay, because they wanted to revel in their own complexity and their own complicated nature of what they were doing. But the essence of what their problem was, they were simply focusing on symptoms rather than looking for the underlying leverage point, solving the real underlying problem that was the root cause of all of their difficulty. And as I've done this with numerous situations, I currently don't believe that there are any new problems. There are problems with new labels on them, which confuses us. But the system's archetypes are universal. When I read Bertalanffy's Uncommon Sense, The Life and Thought of Him, and in it it said he was searching for fundamental underlying structures that operated across all branches of science. And when I read it, I thought it was ludicrous. And after I thought about it for a while, I said, oh, all of the branches of science are a fabrication of man, not nature. So why wouldn't there be the same structures that operate across all branches of science? And what he originally wrote was a paper in German on general systems teaching. And the translator screwed it up and called it general systems theory, which he never wanted, and he was stuck with it for the rest of his life. He wanted to dissolve all of the stovepipes that isolated different disciplines so that you could go from one discipline to another and take a lot of your learning with you, because as soon as you figured out the labels on the structures that were operating, you knew how to deal with the situations. Because for all of the systems archetypes, there are well-defined strategies for dealing with them. They have very characteristic patterns of behavior. And one or two, maybe three in some cases, approaches for dealing with them. So if you can figure out what it is that's going on, the approach to dealing with them is relatively easy if you can get people to care. And the thing that I keep saying is, you got to know what, you got to know why, you got to care why, and then know how. Because if you don't care why, trying to get them to know how is an absolute waste of time and money, because nothing's going to happen.
So doesn't that sound like the problem we should be working on?
I'm working on it relentlessly.
When I saw that the archetypes were the same, and agree that the archetypes were same across scientific disciplines and cultures and time, and then I heard that there were 7 basic plots, and now it's boring to watch a movie with me because I can predict, oh, that guy's going to get shot in about 5 minutes if he does XYZ. The plots are the same. Oh, now I've got a massive tool set. I've got a better tool set than time or reputation for somebody to let me have at it. You know what I mean?
That's the framework.
The thing that's missing in, I would really like to accept and understand the system of archetypes that we can apply and understand. Then I run into people who, let's put it this way, everybody wants to make a difference in life. Okay? And that's where the most perfect systems engineering solutions get twisted and changed because they want to make it theirs. And in that process, we encounter a lot of problems and we generate new problems. If we can reduce those to the archetype and then solve it, it then deny those persons who do genuinely want to make a difference that opportunity. No, that consultant solved all the problems. Let's just apply his solution. We get opposition.
There are enough problems that there are
We
a lot
get
of people
problems.
to be
Yeah.
involved in solving them.
You
I know,
can't
but,
make
but that the Constitution says people want to pursue their own happiness. The pursuit of happiness is a human right. Okay, and that means if you think about it, so you want to make a difference. You want to stand out among your equals. What they tend to forget is that they need to be part of a group of equals first in order to be able to distinguish what's different, what's better, what's new, and what we should agree upon. Okay. That to me is some kind of archetype that I don't find in the fat books, okay, or even on the online. But I think we need to start including those idiosyncrasies of people who are messing up the systems, the situations they find just in order to make a difference. And even the shooters, in Austria, they had a guy who was shooting up a school. It's not just an American system, a problem. He ran out of ways to make a difference in his life. And of course, the biggest adrenaline shot that you get is destruction. Okay, that's another problem that we have to deal with. If you can't improve something because everybody else is in charge and tell you how to do things, you get urge to destroy things, to get in the way, to stick a wheel, put a stick in the wheel. That's another problem. I'm getting all over the place now. But as good as systems engineering and systems thinking has become, we're not there yet. Okay? There's work to do.
and I find that these conversations cue up things that I hadn't thought of before. Thank you very much, John, because I just had Gemini map the 7 basic story. What'd you call them? Story
Plots. 7
plots
basic plots.
against the system's archetypes. I'll post. Oh, it's awesome. I'll post it when I post this video.
It's not quite 1 for 1, but I bet it's pretty close.
No, it's typically 2 archetypes in each one of the stories. like
Oh,
the like the tragedy. Well, the tragedy is related to drifting goals, shifting the burden, and an escalation structure. And rebirth is shifting the burden, limits to growth, and underinvestment. And so,
wow, thanks. Wow.
well, I could have done it 2 years ago, but thanks to you, I did it now. So, that's why I have trouble paying attention, because everything connects.
Right, fun. It's strange the way that works. Yeah.
Well, I thank you all. There will be a session on Tuesday, but not next Thursday. I have another doctor's appointment. So I always post the schedule in the beginning of whatever, wherever it is that I'm posting this, so that it tells which days I'm not going to be here. Okay.
Yeah.
So thank you all.
Do be aware that there's a Discord channel that we started last week. for ongoing discussion. If you're
I sent it
interested,
to everybody.
Everybody's got that. Yep.
Okay.
So good. Thank you.
We'll
Thank
see
you,
if we
Gene.
can figure out how to make it meaningful.
Right.
So, well, thank you all. Till
Take care,
next week.
Thanks, Gene, for doing
Have a
this.
great weekend.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.